From Chicago, welcome to 3Degrees Discussions. I'm your host, Mike Vasquez. This is a podcast devoted to the stories behind the innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders in the 3D printing industry.
With the knowledge of new innovation and new players keep coming in, people don't really want to buy anything anymore. They just want capacity. So I predict that very similar to the Amazon's AWS storage in the cloud on demand. I just need storage in the cloud. I just pay for it. I don't care where the servers are, what security, who you hire, what facility requirement you have. I just pay for the storage. And I think in the future, that will be the same for 3D printing, meaning let's say I'm Tesla. In the future, I want to make an e-bike, but I don't want to buy a machine. I don't want to operate it. I want you to just give me, using your machine in the cloud, I just want 5,000 bike frame e-bike, and I want 7,000 e-scooters, and I want that material, and I want this spec, this size, and this cost. If you can do that, I will buy those, and if I need less, I will crank down the demand or double that demand. But I will skip tooling. So I think the behavior, the purchase cycle, the 3D printing sales will be buying capacity, not printers anymore, or parts.
That was Tuan Tranpham. Tuan is the Chief Revenue Officer at Arevo. Arevo is enabling manufacturing as a service for delivering composite manufacturing today via breakthroughs in software, robotics, and material science. With on-demand manufacturing of large thermoplastic composite parts and structures from bikes to flying cars, Arevo is revolutionizing mainstream manufacturing and the global supply chain. Tuan has spent 17 years working for 7 3D printing companies such as Z-Corp, 3D Systems, Objet, Stratasys, Arcam, Desktop Metal, and now Arevo. Tuan joins the show to talk about his experience selling multiple 3D printing platforms and how the customer of the technology has evolved over the past decade. Welcome to the show. Why don't we just get started with a little bit of a background and when you got your start in Additive?
Sure. I was lucky to bump into 3D printing by accident in late 2002. And through a friend of a friend, I met up with the CFO of Z-Corp. And I was really excited about what they were doing with glue and powder. So I joined 3D printing and Z-Corp summer of 2003, and then spent the next 11 years working for Z-Corp 3D System, Object Stratasys. And while at the Object, I did some research with the Israeli team looking into metals, and I got excited about metals because through 2012, it turns out less than 2% of the entire industry of 55,000 industrial 3D printers were in metal. So I got excited because what if it was 3, 4, or 10%, and really wanted to get into the metal space. And Stratasys back then had just been a distributor for Swedish Arcam. So then I was able to get into Arcam as head of sales for the US in June 2014, and spent 2.5 years building up the Arcam business in the US, followed by, just before they got acquired by GE for $700 million, I joined Desktop Metal in September 2016, building out the go-to-market strategy for Desktop Metal, which I did for 3+ years, and recently wanted to venture into something new and joined Arevo for composites 3D printing. So it's been an amazing 17 years so far.
And throughout that time, you've worked with companies at different stages, I would say, in the 3D printing world. Some public companies, some startups. And what has been kind of a common thread that you've seen with all the different companies and technologies that you've worked with throughout your time in the industry?
I think it comes back to your personality, right? Do you like to be in a well-defined, in a big company? Actually, a lot of people don't know this, but before 3D printing, I spent 4 years with Intel. And being one out of 80,000 employees of Intel was definitely not interesting. So I had a passion to make a difference and work in a company where there are not well-defined boxes, but everybody works together as a team. So I actually deliberately joined a startup. So the startup I joined in semiconductor in '99 was a small company called Giga, and it got acquired for 1.25 billion in the spring of the year 2000, just before the bubble bursted. And at Zico, I was employee number 80 as well. And the same is true with Arcam. I was employee number 80. So I haven't been in the very early beginning. So desktop metal was really early. When I signed the papers with Rick Fulop, I was employee number 24 with the option to join no later than September 1st, which I did. And at that time, I was employee number 46. So I enjoy being in a startup where you get to define the procedures, the product, the process, and really the most enjoyable part is actually building up the team, because it's really about the people. So I really enjoy being in a startup. And when I joined recently in March, Arevo, we were about 38 people, and today we're about 60. So it's fun. It's challenging, but a lot of fun.
So for those who aren't in-depthly familiar with Arevo, can you explain a little bit about what you guys are doing?
Sure. So Arevo has actually been around for 6 years. It's a Silicon Valley startup, initially looking to FDM composites, but saw that the way of the future would be robotic for a larger part using continuous carbon fiber. So Arevo spent the last 6 years optimizing the hardware, software, and materials all developed in-house, made in America, and have just begun commercializing the product, and has sold 2 aqua printers to Japan, and brought me on board to extend the moving us to the next phase of commercializing the company. And we recently raised 25 million in funding to grow that through not just enabling parts business for continuous carbon fiber, but also printer business sales in addition. So we are right now building the largest composites print farm, 3D printing composites print farm in Vietnam. I will start with a dozen of aqua printers, but there will soon be 120 plus.
Wow. And I see a lot of your LinkedIn posts. You're next to a really cool looking bike. So is that a target market for you guys, kind of the cycling transportation area?
You know, each technology has its strength and has its weakness. We are very good at making strong parts, but lightweighting them at the same time. So because of our robot technology and the filament size that we're using through our single extruder deposition head, we are very good at geometries from a soccer ball to a bike frame. And the bigger, the better, because if you go bigger than a basketball, none of the FDM composite machine like Markforged or Anisoprint can print those. So that's a mid-size to large size. Nobody can do that. And you know, a bike frame is just a perfect size considering our build envelope is roughly 1 meter cube. So a bike frame is a perfect size, especially for continuous carbon fiber, because the shape of a frame, especially without the seat tube, is going to be awesome with the continuous carbon fiber, because you don't want to cut the fiber too many times. It slows down the process. So the geometry, the size, the application, the volume, given the stage where we're in, it's just a killer app, one of many. We are known as a bike company, but we have done e-scooters, but we will do a lot more. But it's not a bad thing to be known for being an e-bike company or e-scooter company.
Right. And I suppose now with kind of the way COVID is, there's really a bike boom in terms of people. I know my family and I've looked into bikes, and I've heard a lot of the same or across the country, where just transportation is kind of changing. Even before this, and cycling and biking is getting more interest in many cities.
Yeah, but if you think about it, this would not be the only pandemic in our lifetime, right? There might be more, and we might not have a vaccine for those yet. So right now, who wants to commute for urban mobility? Who want to commute in a crowded subway or a bus or other transportation for urban mobility? And so I think e-bikes and e-scooters is going to be booming, and also it's green, it's good for the planet, right? E-mobility is going to be even bigger.
Yeah, and when we were first organizing this podcast, one of the things that I was really, really excited to talk with you about and hear your perspectives on is, I mean, over your career, having worked in many different technologies and with different companies, you've talked to so many customers and had those customer conversations about 3D printing. I'd like to dive into that a little bit and maybe just start with how has the customer, the end user, changed over the time that you've been in the industry? Kind of maybe first starting with Z Corp is kind of a different technology and application, mostly on the prototyping. But when you're talking to potential customers, then like what perspectives or what was your approach in telling them about the technology?
Sure. To paint the landscape, you have to think of the whole industry being less than a billion. And now, fast forward 15 years later, we are about 10 billion. And in 15 to 20 years, it might be 100 billion. And thinking that in the past, there was a lot of prototyping in plastic, and there have been a big push for metals for prototyping. And in between, you have composites between plastic and metal. So to answer your question, in the early days, it was about making 3D printing affordable. So the market didn't even know about 3D printing. So we had to teach people about 3D printing even before what your product can do and how it does it differently than your competitor, right? So back then, 15 years ago, there was below 100,000 industrial. There was only dimension in Z Corp. So the world was much simpler, right? It was either you're going to go fast prototyping in full color, or you need strong plastic parts for functional prototyping and tuning. Today it is very crowded, and there are a lot of materials available today with composites and ceramic and new innovation keeps coming. So it's gonna force the sales guy to hone in their sales pitch and be knowledgeable about the ecosystem, which is getting bigger. But to answer your question in a different way, in the past was I want to learn this new technology, I want to bring it in-house, whether it was for plastic or metal. But actually that has changed. So now there are too many options, too many technologies, too many material offering. And what the customer that I'm starting to hear from is that, you know what, I have a problem. I've done a certain part traditionally. I really don't care. And for example, let's say it's a metal part. I really don't care how you're doing it. Is it laser beam, electron beam? How you're doing it? I want you to replicate the same or better design in metals, for instance. But I want you to make it cheaper and faster. So that forces the game where they are not necessarily defined by what machine they need to bring in-house or procure. They want the manufacturer to provide those solutions. And now they're like, I don't even want to buy a machine. I just want those parts. And not only the non-negotiable is the quality, but cheaper and faster. But I need to have the financial justification. So unless you can move costs from dollars per cubic inch to cents, then you're not going to sell to them. What I'm trying to lead to, I think the future customer of 3D printing will be of a different breed, especially with COVID. Because with so many new technologies and innovation and startups, if you think of 5 years ago, a lot of the players you see today, like Xerox or HP or Carbon or Desktop Metal, they weren't even around 6 years ago. So imagine 6 years from now, there will be even newer players. It could be players, new entrants like Google or Amazon or other companies. So with the knowledge of new innovation and new players keep coming in, people don't really want to buy anything anymore. They just want capacity. So I predict that very similar to the Amazon's AWS storage in the cloud on demand. I just need storage in the cloud. I just pay for it. I don't care where the servers are, what security, who you hire, what facility requirement you have. I just pay for the storage. And I think in the future, that will be the same for 3D printing, meaning let's say I'm Tesla. In the future, I want to make an e-bike, but I don't want to buy a machine. I don't want to operate it. I want you to just give me, using your machine in the cloud, I just want 5,000 bike frame e-bike, and I want 7,000 e-scooters, and I want that material, and I want this spec, this size, and this cost. If you can do that, I will buy those, and if I need less, I will crank down the demand or double that demand. But I will skip tooling. So I think the behavior, the purchase cycle, the 3D printing sales they will be buying capacity, not printers anymore or parts.
That's really interesting. So I'm trying to digest that a little bit. So if you imagine that scenario, if you're a printer manufacturer, you've got a new technology for producing parts, you kind of flip your business model on its head a little bit, that you're producing, you may enable a few partner contract manufacturers to use your technology. You're not trying to sell to everybody. And then part of your sales force is really driven on finding applications to fill the capacity that you've built. Is that kind of the idea?
Correct, because you're trying to solve a problem, an application, where the customer do not need to, even if they have the money, they shouldn't have to buy the equipment and then struggling to find an operator who actually know how to operate the machine and retain that staff in a facility, bulletproof, fireproof, just to run this expensive laser powder bed or electron beam powder bed. So skipping all that hassle, what people want is just a solution. They do not necessarily need to own the equipment or facility, as long as everything is proprietary and under NDA and everything's protected. I just want to pay for capacity. I just want to pay parts.
Yep. Interesting. And you kind of see that a little bit with the way that some of the big printer equipment manufacturers have started to build in their own consulting teams, right, to go into as part of the sales channel, where they're helping with driving solutions and applications. Ultimately, they're trying, in some cases, to get to a machine sale, but they're seeing if they can either be somewhat of a matchmaker or kind of build some of those application sets.
Agreed. And EOS did a great job with the additive minds or AdWorks from GE, because if you don't help prospect to figure out the right application to go additively with, then you're going to have a struggle, whether they're buying a piece of equipment or not, on how to operate it. That should be secondary. So I think there's now a trend that manufacturers are spending more funding in training and enabling a consulting team, application development. And in addition, you saw the push from Carbon. You don't need to own the equipment. You can just subscribe, so that you never hold the title, but it will always have the latest updates and upgrades for both hardware and software. But that is where we are today. What I'm saying is, I predict in the future, it will go even beyond that. You don't even need to buy an equipment. You don't even need to subscribe to any equipment or capacity equipment, because you can just buy capacity. And they will help you to optimize the consulting of the application and the design. Once that is dialed in, and the question is, do you need 5,000 e-bike or 15,000? It doesn't matter. I can do a 12 different model. I can do customization. So really the play here is capacity and supply chain disruption. And part of 3D printing is also bringing manufacturing back to America. And that is very refreshing.
For sure. And I think with with just seeing a lot of the trends over the last 3 to 5 years, you're seeing more excitement about the potential of disrupting some of those supply chains and having new business models. And as you kind of are talking to customers now with Arevo and in your past, I mean, how much of your kind of challenge comes from just explaining the technology, right? You've worked in a lot of different modalities with the Z Corp and Desktop Metal and Arcam and now Arevo. All of those fuse together materials, use different materials, have different timescales, different pros and cons. I mean, what's that challenge like, and being able to explain to people how does this actually work?
Sure. So with this evolution, like 15 years ago, what is 3D printing? That was the first question. I think over time, with the media covering 3D printing and with so much fundraising in the last few years, it got more attention. So I would say the market has become more aware. So it's no longer what is 3D printing. They kind of know what is 3D printing and what it can do. And now the question is not what can you do, but more the question is what can you do compared to everybody else, and how do you future-proof my future needs? So the conversation has changed, where you need to hone in your unique selling points and value added. But even if you pass that, the concern in the past was never that my equipment that I'm buying or subscribing will be obsolete in just 2-3 years. How do I future-proof myself for that? So definitely the audience is more educated, and generally they're educated, they're aware of 3D printing in a good way. There are still some misinformation. Oh, I didn't think you could do that, or I thought you could just press print and go. So I think they're definitely more knowledgeable, but I still see this is good and bad at very big companies that I've met. And maybe because 3D printing is still a disruptive technology, that the team leader assigned for what can 3D printing do for us is often very young engineers, which is good and it's bad. It's good because they are not polluted by or brainwashed by subtractive manufacturing or the old way of doing things, because you have to have an open mind. So that's why you have a very young, assign a young team leader for Additive do the due diligence, but they do not necessarily have the influence of without. They need an executive sponsor to have any saying or decision making. So I think that's getting better over time, that people are more aware. But lately, I've been starting to see more visionary customers talking about where they see not what 3D printing has been or what it's doing today, but how it could be in 5 years, not just for additive manufacturing of 3D printing, but as part of the fourth industrial revolution. Should we add AI, machine learning, sensors, big data? Should it be in the cloud? How should we plan for factory of the future? So things are slowly coming together in the sense that the fourth industrial revolution, 3D printing is one of those at least 8 key technologies, but how do they converge with not all the other 7, but many of the other key technology of the fourth industrial revolution? How can they come together and be the solution for factory of the future is what I'm starting to see now.
Okay. And when you like to dig into that, your comment about kind of who's usually on the other side of the table when you go into talk about 3D printing and talk about your machine and technology. So you said it's in a lot of times kind of young engineers who are leading the charge. From kind of your experience, what does the sales kind of channel and communication look like for 3D printers? I mean, my impression is that you've usually these are long conversations, especially if the higher the price point of the printer, and you're dealing with some engineers, some marketing folks, some maybe leaders at a higher level, but just in your experience, what's the evolution of a sales conversation like for a new machine?
I think for newer, not cutting edge, but bleeding edge technology, the conversation is long and tedious and it takes time. But also bear in mind with the expiration of key technologies like FDM or SLA or DLP. So what was a long conversation in the past for $100,000 SLA machine, you can now get that from Form Labs for less than 4,000, right? You can buy a very good FDM machine from Ultimaker. So more and more industrial printers require a much shorter budget approval process from asking for $250,000 or 100,000 or 50,000 is very different when you're below 5,000 and you have a company credit card. So for those, I would say mature, non-exclusive, meaning the core pens have expired, those conversations are much shorter. For conversations with the laser powder bed, there used to be 600,000 above. Now you can get it for 100,000. It's also getting shorter. And what people are focusing on more is ease of use and also serviceability. But for new technology, new way of doing metal, for binder jetting or MHD or other technologies, you still need to educate them in this cutting edge technology. And the same is true for composites. Even I didn't pay much attention to composites until recently, and I see that it's been neglected, but I still need to teach people about composites because even people within the industry, not many people know about what is anisotropic versus isotropic material properties. I didn't even know that until March this year. So for cutting edge technology, you still have a long cycle, but it's getting easier over time.
For sure. And I guess another thread I'd like to pull is you've kind of been in a leadership position in a number of companies, kind of building out teams and for sales and marketing and kind of driving first customers. What do you look for in building a team out to support a project or a product or material or advancement?
I think a lot of the things that investors look into is really about the team. You can have a big dream, you can be in a very big market, you have a potential of becoming a unicorn, all that, but if you don't have the right team to execute, you're not going to be anything. So the people, the team is very important to me. So to answer your question, it is very much about a cultural fit that especially for startup, you gotta not all people just because they want to be in a startup should be in a startup because high risk, high reward. They are not defined processes. You have to create and develop those. So it is much more about being hands-on and not being a prima donna. So really being down to earth, a little bit of evangelist because these younger startups, especially with a big ambition, are trying to change the world. With Arevo, we're trying to make the world lighter using continuous carbon fibers, in most cases stronger than metal, but 3 times lighter. So you've got to be a believer in something new, and you're going to be dealing with a lot of rejection and non-believers, and you're going to struggle to make your vision of the founders or the CEO to come true and make that happen. So so when I look for people who are down to earth team players, you got to be a team player. If you're not a team player, you should really not be in a startup because teamwork is so important. It's not just about team, but there's got to be trust because when you're in a startup, if it's good and it's exciting and it has a big potential, there will be competitors. So you don't have the luxury of time to go slow. You have to go fast and you have to work hard. So it's a certain breed. When I hire people who have not worked for other startup, but if they have the willingness, just like asking people who want to lose weight, but unless they're actually doing the work, cutting down the intake, changing their diet and exercise, unless you're willing to do what is needed and be disciplined, you're not going to be a right fit. So I would say cultural fit, attitude is very important. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess kind of, just to follow up to that is, what advice would you give folks who are looking to make a transition either within the 3D printing space or from a different sector of manufacturing or technology, on kind of joining a company or looking for a company? Do you say that, hey, you get the most bang for your buck by kind of cutting your teeth at a established player and an established technology, or would you encourage them to look at some of the startups out there?
I think the short answer is to get started and get in, meaning that 3D printing, I made a big bet 17 years ago and had options to leave the industry, I was and I am committed to this industry for 17 years, and I work for 7 manufacturers. So writing a career choice, working for, I wish somebody taught me that in school when I got my engineering degree, that do try to do some homework and what are the growth industries or vertical technologies and build a career around that. Nobody told me that. This is actually by accident that I bumped into 3D printing, but it was the right bet to stay with it. Some people left it 10 years ago, but realized that it still has a lot of momentum and they came back. So to answer your question, I would say get started. There's still a lot of growth potential for the industry. Most technologies take about 50 years to mature and peak. The internet, we are right now, since 1970, we are right at the peak of the internet where it is known. 3D printing, if you look at metals, which is driving most of the excitement, it's about 30 years. So the next 20 years, there's a lot of growth. I strongly believe there's a growth path for the industry going from 10 billion to 100 billion. So to answer your question, just get started, whether it's small or big, get started, get to network within the industry, get to know at least the 7 print engine of ASTM, getting familiar with the people, the media, the academia that is enabling a lot of these technologies. So basically, just get started. It will be an exciting journey. There will be newer technology, newer players that we don't even know yet. It's going to be fun. So if you're wanting to be part of 3D printing, it is not too late. Even now is a good time to get started. There will be, if we look at the last recession of '08 and '09, there was a lot of deployment, reallocation of people. But what we learned from that is also core technologies expired. So you saw a lot of FDM clones. Well, Arcam, electron beam melting core pens expired recently. That's why you're starting to see new startup using electron beam as well, as an example, like Freemelt in Sweden, or Wayland Additive in UK, or QBeam in China. So with this recession we're going through now, with so many people being laid off, there will, and if they love 3D printing, they still want to remain in this industry, and they will look at new way of doing 3D printing. So I think in 5 to 10 years, there will be an expansion of the industry players, but also as helping to fuel the growth of the industry. So just get in, start somewhere big or small, but learn and spend time and network. Definitely participate and be involved with AMOC, which is one of the largest additive manufacturing user group. That you probably learn more in that 1 week than doing internet search for a quarter.
For sure. And that's always been my experience. And I guess from my last question, as we get to wrap up with, it's certainly been an interesting year with COVID and the pandemic and kind of limited face-to-face contact with your existing customers and new customers, and without Formnext, kind of this year, it'll be a year in many cases where some of these trade shows have happened. How are you guys adapting, or how are you rethinking the ways that you keep in touch with people and tell them the stories about your technology?
The answer to your question is very similar to everybody else, right? With all the events and physical events being canceled and going virtual, we are all going virtual. How do you sell printers without meeting them, traveling, doing seminars or trade shows? You have to move online and virtual. So we're doing a lot of webinars. I think in terms of a marketing hack, is still still need the branding and presence. So doing the Indiegogo Super Strata bike to showcase what the technology can do to get coverage is another way of moving that online. So having engagement. LinkedIn has been a very powerful tool for, so cold calling is dead. But what you're starting to see is social media influencers, where you learn from the media. People, just like when you buy a car, you don't need to go to a dealership to buy a car anymore. You do all your research online, and you have people that you trust, and you read reviews, and you almost have the deal made by email, getting the best price before you show up and closing it. And the same is true right now. Is you can put a lot of content on LinkedIn and other platforms. If anything, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram is going to have a boost as people move online. Everybody's being confined at their home for now, right? So all online.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. This has been very insightful for me. I've learned a lot, and hopefully look forward to seeing you in person soon, or whenever that may be, at the next trade show, or whenever we pass through the same town. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.